of Section G is we're focusing on the residents' ability to perform their daily self tasks over the last 3 days. We're not asking what they could do ideally, right? We are documenting what they actually did and how much support they needed from others. So this helps us tailor care plans that build on what they can still do and provide what they can still do or what they still do and provide the right support where needed. So accurate coding here is crucial, right? It reflects real-time functional status. So we want to avoid underestimating a resident's potential as well as overestimating their independence. That's why we look at the three most dependent episodes of care to determine their typical need for assistance. Right? We code from 0 to 8. So let's look at them individually. So we start here with independent. So we use this when the resident perform the activity completely on their own, no setup help, no reminders, no supervision. They simply did the task themselves. One, so independent with setup help only. So this is still mostly independent. The staff might, hand them a toothbrush or they're going to lay out their clothes. But once the materials are ready, the resident takes over without physical help or reminders. Supervision. So here the resident needs oversight. Okay, they need verbal cueing. So maybe they forget a certain step. They need encouragement, but there's no physical guidance involved. Everything's verbal, or you're showing them, right? Limited assistance. So this one involves some hands-on help, okay? So you're guiding a limb or you're helping them start a movement. However, it does not include weight bearing for the resident. And that's the important distinction, right? From limited assistance to extensive assistance is the weight bearing part. So when we get to the extensive assistance, now we are in weight bearing territory. So the resident still does at least half of the work, right? That's important. But the staff must lift a limb and or assist more actively to complete this task. But it's one helper, right? Now, when we move on to 5, to maximal assistance, so the resident participates less than half the time, but still contributes in some way. So this is significant help, right? Often involving lifting, guiding, and continuous support. And we see here, right, in the assessment description, weight bearing, including lifting limbs by 2 plus helpers. Okay. So if you're not lifting more than 50%, but you are 2 helpers, then you're maximal assistance. If you're 2 or 1 helpers and the weight bearing activity, you're doing more than 50% of that task, then you're also they are also maximal assistance. Okay, it's either or both. Okay, but you're lifting more than 50% of the weight of the arm, And then total dependence, pretty straightforward. The resident did not participate at all in the activity. The staff did everything from beginning to end, so they're not participating. And that's the difference between maximal assistance and total dependence. Is the resident participating in any way or form? And in this one, well, activity did not occur. So we use this activity, it wasn't done at all. And again, right, we're using that 3-day assessment period. So maybe the resident did not walk, right, or they did not bathe at all. Then you would code it as an 8. So those are two of the ones you might see often for that 3-day period. And we need to remember we're going to be looking at 9 coding events because we're looking at 3 days. We're looking at all 3 shifts. We're looking at day shift. We're looking at evening shift. We're looking at night shift. So, if you're familiar with CCRS, if you've been doing this for a while, the um, bathing used to be G2, right? It used to be a different item. Now they've put it in with the first ADLs because they've restructured how you document the ADLs as well. So bathing, right? But and we can see here that bathing has no impact. Okay. So it captures how the resident performs their full body bath or shower. It includes how they get in and out of the tub and shower and how each body area is washed. Arms, legs, chest, perineal area, etc. So, and again, same as with the CCRS, be sure to exclude washing of the back end hair. Okay. And I don't know why they put that there. If someone needs help with something, it's usually the back or the hair. But anyway, they've removed that from there. And they've added a note here, even if the person uses adaptive equipment, right? We're going to measure what they physically do and how much assistance was provided by staff. And that's important, right? What was done by staff. So in any of these, it's not what the resident can do. It's what did the resident do. Like an example, you know, I'm able to get up and get dressed, but I don't want to do it. I want someone else to do it for me. And so for those 3 days, someone had to dress me because I didn't want to do it myself. So it's not a question of what can they do. It's a question of what did they do. And there's a very, very distinction between those two. Very important. Now, personal hygiene. So this will impact your care planning, right? Your collaborative action plans. So anytime something impacts the CAPS, you know it's going to impact your care planning, or it should. It's going to impact your quality indicators. It's going to impact your outcome measures. So we're looking here at grooming tasks. Uh, brushing your teeth, combing your hair, shaving, applying makeup, or washing your face and hands. So it excludes the tasks that are done during bathing. The goal is to assess how much the resident does on their own and what help is required for is it setup or supervision, etc. Then we move on to, okay, so in the CCRS, we had dressing. Now they've separated it in dressing upper body and dressing lower body. So G1C is dressing upper body. So it covers how the resident puts on and takes off clothes above the waist, including undergarment, shirts, bras, fasteners, and any prosthetics or, orthotics. Again, it's not about fashion, right? It's their physical ability to complete this task with or without assistance. And then we just flip that down to dressing lower body. This one includes underwear, pants, belts, shirt, skirts, shoes, stockings, any prosthesis or braces that go on the legs. Okay, so we're going to be clear on what help is provided. Are they lifting their legs? Are they pulling the garments on? Are they needing full assistance? Walking. Again, so if we look at walking and locomotion, both of those will impact your care planning, right? Your CAPS, your quality indicators, and your outcome measures. So walking, we're looking at the resident's ability to walk between locations on the same floor indoors. Okay, so this means room to hallway, hallway to dining room. And this is only about walking, right? If they use a wheelchair, okay, well, that's covered under the locomotion. So we're just walking here. So this is one that we can often see activity did not occur if they're in a wheelchair. And then the next one, F, locomotion. So this includes any form of movement between locations on the same floor. So whether they're walking or they are in a wheelchair, if the resident uses a wheelchair, then we're only interested in how independent they are once they are in the chair. Okay, it is different from transfer skills. And then the last four here we see, okay, we see that they will impact all four. So your care planning, your CAPS, your quality indicators, your outcome measures, and your RUGs. So the late loss ADL. So we're going to start with toilet transfer. So toilet transfer replaces transfer. In the CCRS, we had transfer, like transfer bed to chair, chair to table or whatever. Now they're only interested on the transfer to the toilet. So we're assessing how the resident moves on and off the toilet or the commode. Okay. Now, this does not include, cleaning themselves, managing clothes. That where we do that in the toilet use. Here we're focusing only on the transfer movement and how much physical assistance is required. So if we have someone who does not use the toilet or the commode, then toilet transfer is always going to be an 8, right? If they're fully incontinent or they have a catheter and they have an ostomy and they don't use the toilet or the commode, then it would be an 8. H, toilet use. So this measures the full process of using the toilet, including hygiene, managing clothing, cleaning up, after incontinence, handling ostomy or catheter supplies. It does not include getting to or from the toilet or transferring onto it. And notice how it's in there. It talks about managing clothes. So I'll give you a quick example. You have someone, okay, a gentleman goes in the bathroom. He does his business. He walks out and he's all crooked. His pants, the zipper is almost on the side. His shirt is half off out of his pants, and you have to do that every day. Where just a sec there, Jim Bob, and you straighten his pants, you tighten his belt, you tuck his shirt, then you're assisting him in toilet use because managing clothing during or after toilet use is part of toilet use. And then we have bed mobility. So this is all about how the resident moves in bed, right? So turning side to side, moving in or out of a lying position, and adjusting themselves for comfort. So even small partial movements should be noted. Some residents may be totally dependent here, while others only, they need only occasional prompts. And then we have eating. So it refers to how the resident brings food and drinks to their mouth. So when we think about it, right, it's really a feeding ADL more than an eating ADL. But anyway, so it's called the eating ADL. So it's not whether they have good appetite, you know, um, eh, And this will include the use of adaptive utensils, and it also includes any alternative methods of nourishment, whether it's tube feeding, TPN. So setup help, like opening containers, cutting their meat is common. And then once the food is in front of them, how much do they do? So these assessments, right, they must reflect the actual performance over the last 3 days. We're not talking about capacity. And we need to make sure that we are gathering input from all the shifts, right? And we're going to document what help was actually provided, not just what was offered. So here's an e-query that we pull out from the system. So if a person requires assistance to move his or her legs from the bed to a sitting position on the side of a bed, where in the ADL self-performance section is that amount of assistance captured? So what they answered here is this task is not captured in the ADL self-performance section of the Inter-IL TCF. Lifting the legs in and out of bed to or from a sitting position is not a subtask that's associated with bed mobility. So it's not captured anywhere. And that's the same as transfers now, right? It's not captured anywhere. Sorry, I feel a sneeze coming. So their thought process is if a transfer, the transfer of the toilet should encompass any transfer they need. So when we're scoring the ADLs, right, we need to consider all episodes over the 3 day period. So we're looking at 9 of them. Okay. And if all episodes are performed at the same level, then you score the ADL at that level. If any episodes are at level 6, and then there's any others that are less, you end up with a 5. We're going to go over this again. And then otherwise, you focus on the 3 most dependent episodes, okay? Now, if all episode perform are fewer than 3 times, okay, so we're talking about it only, because we're only looking at 3 days, right? So if it's less than 3 times, if the most dependent is a 1, so we're looking at zeros and ones. Zeros, ones, and eights, then you're going to end up with a 1. If you have anything over a 1, but you don't have a 6, so between 2 and 5, then you're going to score the least dependent of those episodes. So we're going to look at it again. This is a different way of looking at it, and we're going to go over some examples. So the self-performance, okay, again, we need to capture the most dependent level, right? Okay, over the last 3 days. So usually it's all documented in the point of care. So question 1, did the resident require the same level of assistance for this ADL on all 3 days? So if everything's the same, then that's pretty simple. We code that level. Everything's a 5, then you go to 5. That's pretty straightforward. Now, we're looking at 9 episodes, right? If 1 up to 8 of these episodes is at least a 6, doesn't matter how many. If you have a 6 with anything else, doesn't matter how many, you end up with a 5. You end up with a 5. Now, if you don't have a 6, then the next question is, did the resident perform the ADLs as independent and only needed setup help during the 3 days? So are we looking at a mix of zeros and ones? Then we code A1, independent, setup help only. If we're not just zeros and ones, then we're going to go to the next question. So we're going to review what's the 3 highest most dependent episodes of assistance. So we're looking at stuff between 2 and 5, right? Because if we have a 6, we stop here. If they're all zeros and ones, we stop here. If they're all the same, we stop here. But now we're looking, they're not all the same. There's no 6. They're not zeros and ones. So we're looking between 2 and 5. So we're going to score the least dependent of them. And then if there's only one observed occurrence, then you code that single episode. So let's look at a few examples. So here, okay, so the way this works, okay, we have your day shift, you have your evening shift, you have your night shift. Day 1, day 2, you have your ARD, which is day 3 of observation. So this is our 9 documentations in the point of care by the PSWs. Now, again, the system usually gives you a suggested value, but it's important that you understand how you got to that value, and you need to make sure that they're accurate. You need to make sure the PSW is documented accurately. If you're aware of someone having needed extensive assistance, which is a 4 for a few time, or then you need to be able to, well, why am I ending up with this if I know we did more? So in this case, everything's the same. So that's what you end up with. That's like the first question, very straightforward. Now, this one, okay, the only time you're going to end up with a 6 is if they're all 6s or all 6s and 8s, because 8s is it didn't happen. So if every time that happened, it was total dependence, whether it happened once or 9 times. If you have a mix of 6 and 8s, you're going to end up with a 6. If they're all 6, you're going to end up with a 6. If you have a 6 and anything else, you're going to end up with a 5. So the next one here, if I look, these are all 8s. This is the only scenario where you're going to end up with an 8 score. All 9 of them need to be an 8. Absolutely. As soon as something is something else, then it will be coded as that one event. Now, if we have independent, all of them, again, that is the only scenario with a 0, is if they're all zeros or all zeros and 8s. Because if it didn't happen, it's not going to count, but it happened other times. So the only way you end up with a 0 is with zeros or zeros and 8s. So this is an example of it only happened once. So because all of those other events were 8s, so it only happened once. So that's what you end up with. You end up with the score of that one event. Now, when we look at this one, okay, we're getting into a little bit more complicated context, but we're still on question 2. So question 1, did it all happen at the same level? No. So we move on to question 2. Question 2, is one of those 9 events a 6? Yes, we have a 6. So as soon as any of these is a 6, you end up with a 5. Doesn't matter how many 6s. You could have between 8 and 1. As long as you have a combination of 6 and something else, you will end up with a maximal as final for that ADL. Now, here, okay, we don't have a 6, so we're moving to the next. Are they zeros and ones? No. So now we get to that last question, question 4. Okay. So what we do is do we have at least 3 of something? We do. So we're going to use the least dependent. So in this case is a 4. So even though there's a 5, there's not 3 of them, but there are at least 3 4s. So I'm going to end up with a 4. Same scenario we just saw, except we have an extra 5, right? We have an extra maximal assistance. However, the result is the same, right? We have to go with 3 the same. So 3 the same are 4s. So we end up with a 4, right? We're focusing on the 3 least dependent events. So this next one here, okay, we have 3 different possibilities on there, because what I'm going to ask is I'm going to ask for people to um, try and guess what would you code this one? So we're looking at 7 events of 0, 1 of 1, and 1 of 5. So just if you look at all the 4 questions on page 76, we should be able to come to a result. So I'm going to so if we go with that first questions, are they all the same? Nope. We go to that second question, is one of them a 6? Nope. We go to that third question, are they all zeros and ones? Nope. Then we get to that fourth question. Because as soon as you have something between a 2 and a 5, you're disqualified from getting a 0 and a 1. So they're going to look at all your events between 2 and 5 and code you the least dependent. Now there's only one of them, so that makes this one pretty straightforward. You only have the one, so you're going to end up with a 5 on this one. If this was a 0, a 1, or an 8, then yeah. But because as soon as you have something between 2 and 5, you know it's not going to be a 0 or 1, ever. And you don't have a 6. Then you go with the least dependent. So what would you code this one? So if we look at that last sentence on page 76, if only one observed episode occurred in 3 days, code based on that single episode. So correct. It only happened once, so you code it a 0. Doesn't matter what the one episode is, you code whatever that level is. Now, here we're looking at a little variety, okay, of performances. We're looking at a bunch of zeros, a couple of ones, and a 4. So using that same methodology, that's correct. The only time you're going to end up with a 0 and a 1 is if they're all zeros and ones. As soon as something between a 2 and a 5, it disqualifies you from getting a 0 or a 1. So you do end up with a 4. Right? So here we have 8 zeros and a 1. So as we walk through our questions, are they all the same? No. Is one of them a 6? No. Are they all between zeros and ones? Yes. Then it doesn't matter how many ones, you code a 1. So as soon as there's 1, then you code a 1, right? As long as there's nothing else, it's just zeros and ones or eights. All right, our last example here. Okay. What would you code this one? So because we have items between 2 and 5, right? We're disqualified from getting a 0 or 1. So we're going to code the least dependent, which is a 4. Correct. All right. So, a couple of questions here. If a person performed an ADL task at multiple levels during the 3-day observation period, the assessor should score it based on the least dependent level observed. Read this carefully. Think of all the scenarios. I have one brave soul. Yes, it is false. So we have to look at in general, does this apply? So when performance varies, the most dependent of the three right most dependent episodes is used unless there's a score of 6, in which case the ADL is scored as a 5. So if you're looking at every type of this scenario, this is false. Next question. Guided maneuvering of limbs without bearing weight is classified as limited assistance in ADL self-performance coding. Correct. All right. ADL is always a very fun, full section, very important. Um, I would stress to make sure you know that your staff knows how to code the ADLs. especially now that everything is, so we had the resident, and then we had the assistants before. Now they've just amalgamated everything into one answer. So you need to make sure your staff are very well educated on how this works. All right, primary mode of locomotion indoors. So we're identifying the person's usual way of getting around indoors, again, over the last 3 days. So we're not measuring what they are capable of with rehab or assistance. We are recording what actually happened most often. So this includes walking independently, using a cane, walker, or even pushing a wheelchair for support. If someone walked by pushing a wheelchair or used a device like those Mary walkers, that's still considered walking with an assistive device. So then you would code it as 1. And then scooters or wheelchair, you coded 2. If they never left the bed during this period, then they're coded as a 3. The goal here is to reflect the primary mode of indoor mobility. So we focus on the most frequent method, not the best or worst performance. Timed 4-meter walk. So simple performance test, right? And it's to get an objective measure on a resident's stamina and their walking speed. So you make sure that you set up a clear, straight path of 4 meters, okay, 13 feet for those who use the imperial system. All right, you have the resident walk at a normal pace, right? This is not a race, right? We need to make sure we're not going to make them go fast and endanger themselves, right? It's just normal. And then you just time from the moment they start, right, their first step to when they cross your finish line, okay? Now, if they take more than 30 seconds, then you just put 30 in there. 30 or more, you put 30. But they got to the end, okay? They did the 4 meters. If they stopped before they got to the end, they had to sit down, then you put 77, right? Stop before the test complete. If they refuse to do the test, that's fine, you put an 88. If they don't walk on their own, you just put a 99. Now, if they did it in 10 seconds, you put 10. So I don't expect them to do it in 2 seconds, but anything under 30, you just put in the actual number that it took for them to walk that 4 meters. Distance walk. So this item, it asks what's the furthest, the distance the person walked at one time without sitting down over the last 3 days. And this could be during therapy, could be either a routine care, or even just heading to meals. So what you're doing is you're capturing the actual performance. We're not capturing potential. If they didn't walk at all, right, you code for 0. And then if they walk less than 5 meters, 1. And then you have the other parameters, right? 5 to 49 meters, which is quite a bit. 50 to 99, 100 more, and then 1 kilometer or more. So we need to be sure when we're coding this that we check with the resident, we check with the staff, we check with family members. Okay, especially if you did not observe that walk yourself. Now we have a Kai-Hai query here for the distance walked. So the question that was sent in is the definition for G2C distance walked is furthest distance walked at one time without sitting down in the last 3 days with support as needed. Does the support as needed mean assistive devices, or does it also include supervision or assistance from a caregiver? That's a good question. So their answer, this item is intended to capture whether the person is able to walk around the nursing home. So the support as needed refers to assistive devices or non-weight bearing support from a caregiver. So supervision, guided maneuvering, and that may be needed for the person to walk, as opposed to not being able to walk. So as long as you're not weight bearing anything, okay, um, it's fine. Distance wheeled self. So here we're focusing on how far the resident wheel themselves in a manual or motorized wheelchair or scooter without stopping. So it helps track independence in mobility. All right. If they wheel themselves only a few meters, that's fine. You code accordingly. If they use a power chair or a scooter, then you code a one. If someone pushed them the whole time, you code a zero. Okay, just like the walking item. We're looking for the farthest episode of one episode, right? So we're not looking for the total distance throughout the day or multiple go at it. We're not, and we're not going to combine the assisted with the unassisted. So they wheel themselves for 25 meters. They need a break. I push them for 5. And they wheel themselves for 30. So they did 55, but it doesn't count as 55. We're not going to combine to an assisted when there was an assisted in the middle. So it has to be a single episode of wheeling. Okay. So another question that was sent in to Kai High. So G2D distance wheeled self. Okay, so is the farthest distance the person wheeled themselves herself at one time in the last 3 days, including independent use of motorized wheelchair? And then can this be explained? They're just asking for clarification. So this is what they sent. If the person did not wheel themselves, but was wheeled by others, the correct code would be 0. If the person used a motorized wheelchair or scooter, the correct code is a 1. If the person wheeled themselves based on the distance, they wheel themselves code between 2 to 5. So that would be the correct codes. Okay. It would also be the correct if the person's wheelchair wheeled themselves, but also at some point in time used a motorized wheelchair. So just a little bit of clarification from Kai Hai. All right, this one, there's quite a bit of uh, conversation on our last and the one before that credentialing courses that we gave. So that first one, okay, total hours of, we're looking at total hours of exercise or physical activities in the last 3 days. So in this item, right, we are capturing how physically active a resident has been over the last 3 days. We're not just looking for structured exercise programs, right? Any form of moderate physical activity counts. So that could include things like walking outdoors, attending yoga classes, using an exercise bike, or even going for a swim. The goal here is to understand their overall level of physical engagement, because we know that regular movement helps maintain strength and function. Okay, so you're going to ask both the resident, you're going to ask the staff about their activity over the last 3 days, and then you're going to total up the time. It doesn't have to be all in one block. We're looking for a cumulative total. Okay, we're not going to ask them to do 3 hours of exercise at one time, but if they did, half hour, 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the afternoon, 20 minutes in the evening over 3 days, then we have 3 hours. Okay, so those 3 minutes, 20 minutes, 3 times a day. So we would code, right? Uh, three if they're 3 to 4 hours. It helps us identify residents who may be at risk of decline due to inactivity. Okay. Now, in the last quarter, CIHI, when they announced the changes for April 1st, 2026, they updated a coding direction for this item in particular. I don't believe they helped with clarification in any way, but what they said is they indicated, and I'm quoting at what their release was, to be included in the total hours of exercise or physical activity, G3A, the exercise must involve at least moderate physical activity. Because when you went to the manual, it said if they're wheeling themselves, if they're walking around, it counts. Now they're trying to put a stop to, if they're walking from their bedroom to lunch every day, it doesn't count for activity level. But if they're going for a walk outside, it does. So they're looking for a moderate physical activity. Okay, and then we sent in some questions in the next few slides. You'll see that. So let's finish with this slide, and we'll get to that CIHI query. So G3B, number of days they went out of the house or building in the last 3 days. So pretty straightforward, right? So it's about social and environmental engagement. How often does this resident leave the building, or have they left over, the last 3 days? Even if it's a short outing, it counts, right? So you are going to record how many days they went out, whether it was for a walk, an appointment, or just for some fresh air. If they did not go out at all, but they usually would, we code that separately to help flag potential issues like illness, mood decline, limited mobility. So again, we need to be sure to ask both the resident, and we need to ask the staff, the frontline staff that care for them, right? Sometimes a resident may have gone out for a quick stroll or appointment, and maybe it's not in the chart. So these items, again, they help us get a sense of that resident's functional engagement and participation in their environment. Those are important markers for both the care planning and for the outcome tracking. So no days out. One, did not go out in the last 3 days, but they usually go out over a 3 day period. 1 to 2 of the last 3 days, and then they went out daily. So here, the question that was sent. So I am seeking clarification regarding the interpretation of G3 activity levels, specifically as it relates to moderate physical activity. During a Teams update session held yesterday, it was indicated that activities included under G3 should meet a moderate intensity threshold. The manual, however, states the following: moderate physical activities in connection with activities of everyday life or chosen activities can help to keep person fit in many ways. Exercises need not be strenuous to provide benefit. Regular walking or wheeling a wheelchair may be included in the total hours, as well as physical therapy or less formal exercise. To ensure consistent and accurate coding, I would appreciate clarification on the following: whether physical therapy activities may be included in the total hours when the resident is actively participating, consistent with the manual, and whether walking or wheeling a wheelchair may be considered moderate physical activity for certain residents based on individual functional status and exertion level. So their answer, okay, in collaboration with Intereye, when the new user manual is available, you will see that the intent has been changed to read moderate physical activity in connection with activities of everyday life or chosen activities can help to keep persons fit in many ways. Below a certain thresholds of activity, functional decline may be accelerated. It is possible for persons to participate in exercise programs and show large gains in strength and endurance. So that's the answer they sent. So again, you're going to have to use your clinical judgment, right? It might not be the same for two residents. They walk the same, but he had to really work at it. And the other one, well, they walk 5 miles a day inside. Now, would I want to capture that? Absolutely. He's active. I want to capture that. So it's a damn if you do, damn if you don't scenario on that one. G4, physical function improvement potential. So here, okay, what this section does is it helps us think beyond. All right. So we're looking here beyond what the resident is doing today. It asks us to look at their potential. So it's not necessarily about current ability, but about whether or they or we believe there's a chance for improvement. So if we look at the first question, G4A, the person believes he or she is capable of improved performance and physical function. So we start by asking the resident themselves, right? Do you think that you can do better physically with some support, with some practice, with some, therapy, with some time? I mean, this might mean walking further, showering alone, using fewer mobility aids. Now, even if their belief seems unrealistic to us, we are still going to capture it. Why? Because hope and motivation matter. They influence engagement in restorative care. And then we flip here, okay? B, the care professional believes the person is capable of improved performance in physical function. So we flip the lens, okay? We're asking the care team, based on your observations, do you think this resident has room for improvement? Okay, maybe they've shown progress recently or they had a better day than usual. Perhaps staff notice that the resident avoids doing something that they are physically able to do. Maybe it's out of fear, maybe it's out of habit. Now, when we look at these two items, right, they really help identify which resident could benefit from rehabilitation or restorative programming, because these are still very present and very important. All right, last two slides and we'll break for our afternoon break. Okay, G5, change in ADL status. Oh, and before we go too far, we see that both of these have an impact in care planning, and we could see why, right? What they believe they can do, what we believe they can do, has an impact on how we are going to, develop interventions for these residents. And this one here has an impact on your care planning as well. So your CAPS, collaborative action plans, and then your outcome measures. So here we're looking at a big picture question. Okay. Has the person's overall ability to care for themselves improved? Has it declined or stayed the same compared to about 90 days ago? It's not about small day-to-day fluctuations. We're asking whether there's been a meaningful shift in how much help they need or how much they do for themselves. This includes things like bathing, eating, transferring, or any of the ADLs. It's important to involve staff who know the resident well, right? And then we compare with that last assessment, right? We code improved, right? No change, decline, or uncertain, right? If we we don't know. All right, couple of questions before we break. So in G2C, distance walked includes walking with the assistance of a device or non-weight bearing caregiver support. True or false? This is true. In G4, physical function improvement potential, the opinion of the care professional is not required to determine if the person has potential for improvement or performance. True or false? It is very important. They are considering both. All right, let's take a 15-minute break. I will see you at 20 after 2.